Welcome to my guide for the lore of the Deeps. In this guide I will go over every single spell in the lore and tell you how to best use them to make sure you're getting the most out of them in your battles. The lore of the Deeps focuses on assisting the ranged focus of the Vampire Coast. It has a variety of spells that can increase the efficacy of your own units and stall the enemies to allow you to deal more damage. It can move into more expensive lores with 3 of the 6 spells costing over 10 winds of magic, so you're forced to choose wisely rather than throwing out spells without thinking. The lore is also exclusive to the Vampire Coast. First things first, we have the passive of the lore, Kiss of the Deep. As usual, it's felt map-wide and affects enemy units, causing direct damage to them for 4 seconds, and it of course has no overcasting options. The damage it does isn't going to make or break your battles, but since it is affecting all units on the map, it's making the job of your entire army just a little bit easier, so is a welcome bonus. Spiteful Shot is next up and it's an augment. It costs 4 winds of magic, has a 28 second cooldown, and a 200 meter cast range. It targets allied range units and grants them plus 90 accuracy and magically imbued attacks for 36 seconds. It's great for using on some of your elite ranged fighters when you need them to get some huge damage off in a rush. The magical attacks also make it amazing for going against units that rely on physical resistance and will make your ranged units tear them to pieces. The overcast version of the spell costs 6 winds of magic and ups the duration to 72 seconds, and as usual brings a 50% miscast chance, as all overcasts do. The base version of the spell is good for getting a quick burst of damage off at the start of battles or when you're holding a risky flank. The overcast version is better when you have a sustained angle on some enemy units and can do massive amounts of damage over a longer period of time. Both options are great and fit into the Vampire Coast playstyle very well, and make units that will be a big problem into units that you can take out in a heartbeat. Next up is Tide Call, and it's a breath spell. It costs 5 winds of magic, has a 32 second cooldown, and 100 meter range. It can only be cast on the ground, and causes moderate magical damage in an expanding tear shape. It can disrupt formations and applies the Tide Call effect, which slows down anything hit by 24%. It's weak versus armor and takes 6 seconds to complete its expansion. It's great for using against a bunch of chaff that has very little armor, and can turn the tide of battle in your very early game melee battles. Sending it against anything more elite will make it do basically no damage, so it's not really worth the winds of magic. It's also worth noting that if you aim this spell too much towards your own units, it can do damage to allied troops just as easy as enemies. Overcasting increases the AP damage at the cost of 8 winds of magic, meaning the spell is mildly more effective versus elite units. It's still quite weak, so I'd say anything with an armor rating above 50 will still be able to basically ignore the spell. The base version of this spell is really the version that you'll be using most, but once you get past the point where the enemies are sending chaff, it'll tend to get left to the wayside. Fog of the Damned is next up and it's a hex spell. It costs 8 winds of magic, has a 44 second cooldown, and a 200 meter cast range. It only affects enemy units, and can be cast on the ground or on units directly. It causes them to suffer minus 8 leadership and minus 24 melee attack in a 30 meter area of effect for 35 seconds. It's a pretty generic spell that wants to be spammed on the enemy front lines to both protect your lines and ensure the enemies are running away that much sooner. Overcasting grants minus 40 melee attack at the cost of 11 winds of magic. And while this is great for preventing units from doing almost any damage at all, it is quite expensive and there are much better ways to stop the enemy dealing damage. Ways such as killing them completely with nearly any other spell in this lore. If you're going against something elite that has great melee attack and high damage, then it might be worth using it just to slow down its output, but other than that I can't really recommend it. Denizens of the Deep is up next, and this time it's a summon spell. It costs 12 winds of magic, has a 43 second cooldown, and a cast range of 60 meters, and can only be used 2 times. It summons a unit of rotting Prometheans to fight for you, which slowly degrade over time, and has no option for an overcast. Prometheans are great defensive fighters, so can hold the line against most units for quite a while, allowing your other units to work around them and do a lot of the real damage. Since you have a limit on using these guys, it's best to use them in quite a reactionary way, meaning you only raise them when you really need them, and can get the most out of them. Also worth noting that since they will degrade over time, you need to ensure you're prepared for when they disappear, either by getting rid of the enemies they're fighting, or by moving some units in to replace them once they go. Kraken's pull is second to last, and it's the vortex of the lore. It costs 15 winds of magic, has a 49 second cooldown, and a 200 meter cast range. It can only be cast on the ground, and it causes the Kraken's pull effect to be applied to any unit it hits, which will slow them by 48% for 10 seconds, and the area of effect lasts for 16 seconds. This is a useful spell for pinning down enemy units to give your ranged units more time to churn out as much damage as possible. It can be overcast to increase the duration of the AoE to 33 seconds at the cost of 20 winds of magic. The overcast version should be reserved for only the most elite of enemy units, because very few units in the game will be able to survive the range barrage of the whole Vampire Coast whilst being slowed for 16 seconds. This is a great spell for using with a ranged focus army, as it will allow your units to have much more time to get in shots before any form of melee begins. As I said, the base version should be fine for almost all units, and the overcast version should be reserved for the most elite of the elite. Finally we come to Vangheist Revenge, and it's another wind spell. It costs 16 winds of magic, has a 54-second cooldown, and a 150 meter range. It can only be cast on the ground and causes massive magical damage and a medium-sized forward-moving AoE, and takes 6 seconds to complete its effect. It's insanely strong versus infantry and can do pretty well even if they're quite heavily armoured. Overcasting increases the AP damage at the cost of 22 winds of magic, which is crazy expensive. The overcast version should be reserved for the most elite of the elite enemy units, so be sure to think before you cast. The base version is great for when the enemy brings a lot of infantry that have clumped up, as it will allow you to rack up a massive number of kills in a very short period of time. You don't have to be afraid to use this against basically any blobs you come up against, since the damage they do is so great, it will more than likely get through any armour or resistances the enemy has anyways. That concludes this guide on the lore of the Deeps. If you enjoyed this video and upon then please do leave a like, as it really does help out a lot. Leave a comment of anything you think I missed or should include in future videos. If you'd like to see more videos about Total War Warhammer, there are links in the card and the description for a playlist to my series. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, then maybe click that subscribe button so you stay up to date. After all, it is free. For now though, I was COLONELDAMNEDERS, and I'll see you next turn.